Welcome to the Adapt Performance Podcast, the podcast that lets you delve into the minds of world-class guests all involved in the pursuit of performance. I'm your host, Jordan Webster, and let's get into it. What's going on, guys? Hope you're doing well. So, back with another episode for you. This is a good one. This was a really good one, and you know, I'm actually buzzing how it turned out, considering yesterday, last night, this morning, it's hay fever season, and I was the most bunged up guy in the world, like full nasally, like it was awful. It would have made for the hardest 1 hour of listening for anybody. But actually managed to clear up a little bit, been smashing the antihistamines, and you know, it's bad. But for today then, we are joined by James Langford, and it's an awesome episode. And James speaks through a little bit of his time coming through the industry, and then we get into the nitty gritty of unpicking performance, but whilst working in, you know, a really interesting sport that is Taekwondo. And even though we use Taekwondo as the vehicle in this episode, there's so many good takeaways that you can apply to any sport. You know, just thinking about the way you approach your sport. What does that sport already give you? Can you think about it in a slightly different way? You know, and I think there's going to be so many things in here that I think people are going to listen to, resonate well with, and hopefully, you know, reflect on with their own practice, whether you're an athlete, whether you're a physio, an S&C coach, whatever it is. I think there's going to be some really strong messages in here that you can take away. So I'm not going to chew your ear off for too long. Let's just get straight into the episode. So I'll speak to you soon. Yes, James, welcome to the episode, mate. How you doing?
Thank you, mate. Yeah, I'm not too bad. What about yourself?
Yeah, I'm good. It's boiling outside. I don't know if you've been outside yet, but it's roasting in Sheffield again, so I'm buzzing.
Nice. You know, I've been down the gym this morning, but the gym I'm at, it's a bit of a funny one. It's like your classic old warehouse. So when I get there first thing in the morning, it's free. Even in summer, like it's cold. So I've still got jacket and hoodie on. Then slowly, as bodies start to come in, it starts to, like, the temperature amps up a little bit. So you're never quite sure what's going on outside, like if it's warm, if it's hot, whatever. But yeah, I'm hoping I'll get out with the dog a little bit this afternoon, which will be nice.
Sick. So what have you been doing today then? So you said you've been in the gym this morning, you've been coaching, or was you training yourself?
No, coaching. So Wednesday tends to be my half day. So at the minute, the way I've sort of structured my week is Monday, Friday, I'm with the English Institute of Sport and up at Triathlon in Leeds. So that's kind of like my employed days as such. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I do my self-employed, like private sector work. And Wednesday is my favorite of the days because it's a half day. So I just coach in the morning, come home, do my admin, do any like online programming I need to do for any of my sort of remote guys, accounts, all the boring stuff on a Wednesday afternoon. But it's a nice little break from the coaching week.
Sick. And then 1 or 2 naps, I'm sure.
Yeah, you know, I used to be a big nap guy, like, and a big sleep guy as well. Like, if I didn't get my 8 hours, then I couldn't function the next day. But whether if it's since like Olivia, my daughter, was born or not, naps are no longer a thing, and I can seem to function without much sleep now, which is sad, really. But it is what it is.
Mate, you're an adult. That's full adult life. When you can turn your back on it.
I don't know when it happened either. I didn't want it, but it's just sort of happened. This not being able to nap anymore.
Love it. Sweet. So how about you give us a little bit of an introduction, mate? Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you've been, what you've done, you know, and what you enjoy doing. Just a little bit of an intro for the listeners.
So I suppose my kind of intro into coaching actually came as a bit of a weird one. I was an outdoor instructor initially. So I got my sort of first coaching experience working in, like, not holiday camps, but if you were a kid, most kids in the UK went to like a Kingswood or a PGL or something like that, where you did some like climbing, you did some kayaking, you did some abseiling. And when I left college, I got a job there in one of those centers. So for the first few years, worked in like outdoor sports, but I'd always kind of had a passion for the gym and fitness side of things. So worked a few years in outdoor sports, then qualified as a PT, went down your sort of working gyms, PT route, did a few years of that, but then always having, I suppose, like loads of S&C coaches say, you know, you're sort of a failed athlete, did loads of sports, but didn't really do any of them very well. It then meant that I always had this passion for working in sports, and just decided that I wanted to try and work in a professional setup. So ultimately made the plunge to go back and get my undergrad degree. Got my undergrad degree in S&C at the same time as like working a few internships like everyone does. So worked in rugby league, in kind of youth rugby league, worked in youth rugby union. And then when I started my master's degree in 2017, I got an internship with the English Institute of Sport. So that was based in Sheffield, and sort of that was where I first met you, mate. I was just thinking about that then. Yeah. I think my first day was like your first day there as well, with wheelchair basketball.
It was, yeah, I think it was actually. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I think we both of our first days, and they went, right, you're coaching this wheelchair basketball group, who it was their first day as well. And, so there was a lot going on, but it was mad. It was a bit of a sort of fast get used to how I was running. That's the one. But yeah, so I was based there with GB boxing, wheelchair basketball at the time, sort of para table tennis, just kind of covering a variety of the sports that went on. That was 2017, and then in March 2018, started at GB Taekwondo. So obviously the goal being 2020 Olympics became 2021 Olympics, and I stayed at Taekwondo up until January of this year, when I sort of made the decision to move into the private sector. My initial plan was actually I was stepping back from pro sport, and I was going to go full-time, kind of self-employed private sector, try and continue some of the work that I felt I'd been doing in combat sports, particularly with like a focus in MMA. But then just actually as I was leaving Taekwondo, a role came up with triathlon up in Leeds that was 2 days a week, still with the Institute of Sport. And it just fitted really nicely into what I wanted to do. Like I sort of had this idea in my head that I wanted to keep my foot in pro sports somehow. And then this came up. So started there. So at the minute now I do 2 days a week with triathlon in Leeds, 3 days, sometimes 4 if I work a Saturday, like private sector work, primarily with MMA fighters, both professional and amateur. But then also I've got some professional boxers. I've got a karate athlete, kind of an array of combat sports anyway. And then still do a little bit of consulting work for Taekwondo, just with their development squads.
That's awesome. That's cool, mate. It's I think your journey through S&C is very similar to mine, and I think it's probably very similar to a lot of different people's as well. That PT, just enjoying being around people and coaching, and then just kind of hooking on to the next thing. You've definitely spent more time in the IS than I have, which is, something I always wanted to do more of, actually. Just a quick funny story before we move on, mate, because I'm not sure if you know this. So I can remember speaking to Mark Campbell, probably like a week or two after I'd met you, and we were just speaking about how's James getting on, all those things, sound guy. And Mark was like, yeah, he's sound, mate. He's not going to be around for long. I was like, why? He's like, well, he's applying for jobs left, right, and centre, and I guarantee he's going to get one super quick. So we're on the lookout already for somebody else to get in.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So he was just pumping your tyres there. So he I'll take that. He knew you was going to be moving on. He knew it, which is always nice to hear.
Yeah, it is. I think it was one of them where, and I made that quite evident at the start. At the time I was doing most of my work at Huddersfield Giants under a guy called Kane Daniels, and Kane was like covering the academy side of things. I was doing the scholarships, so like 14 to 16s. Me and a guy called Ryan were splitting that role. And I'm pretty sure at the start, that's it, at the start of that season, or the end of the season in 2017, there was 3 S&C coaches above me. There was Kane, there was Chris, and then I can't remember who was lead. That's quite embarrassing. Oh no, Kane had moved to lead. There was Chris, and then there was Adam. That was it. And they all signed new 2-year contracts, and they all deserved it. Like they were all great coaches. They all deserved it. But then I'm kind of looking ahead going, well, if I stay here now, realistically, I've got 2 years until probably a position comes up. And I've been doing 2-3 years of voluntary internships, placements, just doing whatever I can for free to try and get this experience. And I'm just not willing to kind of wait another 2 years to do that. And rugby league's a very sort of like internal world. Like if you're in rugby league, chances are there'll be a few interns at this club and a few interns at that club. And outside of a few roles, they normally promote inside. And I just thought, I don't want to wait another 2 years. So I saw the opportunity come up at the Institute of Sport. and just thought, well, in that world, there's about 15 or 16, maybe even more S&C coaches ahead of me. The likelihood is one of them will leave before someone at Huddersfield leaves.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a gamble that paid off. I think, in fact, actually, I did about 3 or 4 weeks in Sheffield on the internship, and then I actually got an interview with Warrington Wolves. And I went to Mark and said, I was like, mate, just let you know, I'm not going to be here on Thursday because I've got an interview with Warrington's Academy. And he was like, he did say, it was like, I thought you might be gone quick, but I didn't think it'd be this quick. But it worked out well. I mean, I didn't get the job. I was gutted at the time, but it worked out in the long run. Worked out much better in the long run.
Was so getting your role at GB Taekwondo then, was that your first interview in the institute other than the actual internship, or did you get a few in beforehand?
No, that was my first one, because whatever role came up on the institute, I was applying for it. Wherever it was, whatever it was, I was like, right, I'm in. So no, that was the first one. First one came up and I applied for it, and it was a funny day actually. It was like the X Factor. I think there was 8 of us there at the start, and we did a practical bit. A few were sent home. We did a presentation. A few were sent home, and then we did a last. I think it was just a formal interview. It was like 3 of us left. And I just got a little nudge on the shoulder and I went out. It was like, oh, would you just hang around for our performance director to get back? He's been out all day, but we'd like you to meet him. And I felt really sorry for the other guy in the room because he overheard that conversation. And when he left, he didn't get that tap on the shoulder. And you're like, oh, this is awkward. But he was a good guy.
It is what it is.
Yeah, I kind of felt like it's got the interview's gone quite well. But I think there was something going on at the time, so they didn't get back to me for a couple of weeks. And I had another job I'd been offered as well, and I was kept trying to put them off. And luckily, I say luckily, I'd probably been the other job off anyway. But the IS got back in time, and started at Taekwondo.
That's sick, mate. Was I guess Taekwondo and combat sports then, is this something you always kind of saw yourself kind of pushing towards, or is it something that just kind of happened and now you're in it, you're not going back? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, it just happened. Like growing up, I'd dabbled in a lot of sports. I suppose rugby league would have been my main one that I played. And then it was just through when I started the internship at boxing, kind of the personalities that you're working with in boxing were very similar to what I know from rugby league. Like there were a lot of similar personalities, a lot of similar characters. I was like, okay, I enjoy this. And then the job at Taekwondo came up, and like I said, I was applying for whatever job came up just to try and get into the institute and, to be honest, get that employed work where you get paid for it. And started at Taekwondo and just kind of fell in love with combat sports. Like I think once you're in the world of combat sports, you're then exposed to lots of other things. Like I got exposed to MMA through a link through Taekwondo. And it kind of accidentally happened. So it's nothing that when I went into S&C, I was thinking this is what I want to do. It was just sort of how it worked out, and then kind of went from there, really just rolled with it.
That's sick. And you, I might be wrong in saying this, but you do a little bit as well, right? You do a little bit of BJJ? Yeah,
so I did. I initially started off just before lockdown. I kind of figured I was like, I should do something. But just before lockdown, I started doing some Muay Thai. But the gym I was at, it's one of my biggest pet peeves with like combat sport gyms, in that the session was an hour. Any Muay Thai session I went to was an hour, but the first 30 minutes were like star jumps, push-ups, bodyweight squats, and like these big elaborate warm-ups before you get into the session. And I'm a big like, no. If I want to get warm, I'll come 15 minutes before and I'll warm up. I want an hour of coaching. Like I want to learn. So that didn't really last long, bin that off. And then when the guys flew out to the Olympics, and I had a bit more time on my hands because some of the other guys that weren't going to the Olympics took a bit of a break. I joined a BJJ gym and then started doing some jits. Although my daughter put a bit of a sort of roadblock in that. I think since she's been born, I've been about 4 times. Maybe a bit more, but not much more than that. But it's one of those things that, really enjoying it. And as soon as we sort of get these bedtimes a bit more secured and I get a bit more free time, just intend on picking back up with it.
That's awesome, mate. That's awesome. So with Taekwondo then, so it's definitely not a sport I've spent, I think I had one guy when I was at Hallam, and it was kind of fleeting, the amount of impact I could really have, because he was like one athlete of about 50 I had to take care of as the coach, and, didn't really get a good enough opportunity to really dig into the nitty gritty, which is a little bit of a shame, but it is what it is when you've got a lot of athletes. So talk to me about Taekwondo, a little bit around some of the challenges they face, some of the things that you think is quite important for their performance, and just kind of see where they go with it, mate, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course. I think in terms of the biggest challenge, I think it's similar to most combat sports and martial arts for anyone that's worked in it. Is there's definitely an element of tradition that still runs true. And in some ways, I think that's really good. And that probably needs to be there because that's got people to certain points where they are. But in some ways, definitely as a support team, and particularly as like a sports science team, you're trying to counteract some of that. So like our guys would do probably 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, kind of a 2, sometimes 2.5, sometimes 3-hour group session in the morning where they're all grouped in together. And then throughout the afternoon, they might have the odd individual where they come in and kind of work with their coach on some of their own like technical things they're trying to focus on. Sometimes they might have 2 sessions a day, 2 Taekwondo sessions in the same day, sprinkle some S&C on there. And you've got quite a jam-packed week and quite a high training load consistently week to week. And that's kind of, I think, stems from the Korean tradition that is like, I went out to Korea in 2019 and they do train a lot out there. Like their training volume is very high. But I definitely think there's something in the fact that when you're in a country where that's almost your main sport, by the time you get to these guys at the very top, they're probably just the ones who are able to endure the most training and didn't break growing up. So you've got these like almost machines that can just take training load and handle it really well. Whereas particularly in the UK, we're not blessed with that. You're picking from a very finite group of people. And then the challenge that you face is to try and get them to progress technically. The approach is we're going to give them all this training, lots of training volume, but we know they can't handle that. So that's probably the biggest challenge that we face. And then with it being a combat sport, we're not kind of blessed with some of the GPS metrics in terms of monitoring training load, and training load isn't always quite fully bought into either. So there's definitely this thing of you're almost trying to just pick the little wins where you can and really just try and stop these guys from getting injured so they can just train as much as kind of the coach and the PD and everyone else feels that they need to. That's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, with that, I guess you're right in what you're saying from what I know around combat sports and definitely a lot of other sports as well. The training load is definitely something we need to try and get on top of in some way, shape or form, and not necessarily take over, but at least be aware of those things so that we can make informed decisions in our practice, just so we're not the one that breaks them, because that sometimes is the way it goes. What are some of the ways you try to unpick that a little bit, the training load, the wellness? How did you go about that as a team, I guess?
Yeah, so we kind of tried numerous things throughout the 4 years that I was there. I mean, we're always fighting this kind of wave of wellness questionnaires. So initially the guys had an app on their phone that every morning they just put a little wellness questionnaire on the phone. Some did it, some didn't. Then the kind of eye was, well, can we get that information soon enough to react off it? So we kind of put screens in the reception so that when they came in, they almost had to sign in for the day and put their scores in. But equally, again, some did it, some just walked straight past. So that was always an ongoing thing. And we would try and take advantage of if someone did consistently do the readiness questionnaires, then that would be a conversation with a coach. Our Paralympic group, for example, were really good at that. Like they do their wellness questionnaire every morning. So that meant that before training started, I could kind of sit down and have a little word with the coach that was like, look, okay, well, Amy's been reporting really well all this week, but it's now Friday and you're sparring this morning, but she's reporting quite high soreness, quite high fatigue. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I just want you to be aware of this so that now you as the coach can make the best educated decision. So there's definitely an element of trying to use that. I think probably one of the biggest things that we did was, depending on the phase of the year within, the guys would always have S&C sessions with us on either a Monday, Friday or a Tuesday, Friday. So we had a session that was relatively early in the week and relatively late in the week. So when I started there, we took delivery of a Force platform and like a portable rig as well. So one of the first things that we really started to dive into was, well, how can we integrate this into some kind of readiness monitoring as well? So because we're seeing them start of the week and end of the week, like what can we do so that when they come in, I can put in everyone's programs, right? This is your warm up. And then before you get into your session, everyone's doing a drop jump. And then that's kind of almost, we can use it as two ways. One, we can sell it to the athlete as, this is to kind of monitor your ongoing performance improvements in certain characteristics that we feel are important to Taekwondo. But equally, in like a drop jump, if someone is a regular like 3 RSI 0.18 contact time, and then they're coming in this Monday and it's like a 2.4 and the contact times like 1 or 2 standard deviations outside of the norm, then that means that in that moment in time, I can adapt the athlete's program a little bit so that, like you mentioned before, I think in a sport where they're doing so much volume as the S&C, you want to have the maximum impact you can, but without taking away from the technical model. So it allows me to adapt the program, but also just to kind of afterwards speak to the coach and go, look, just FYI, when so-and-so came in today, everything we got from the drop jump was kind of telling me that they're pretty fatigued and it's only a Monday or a Tuesday. Like, I'm not going to tell you what to do now, like, but you're the coach, you have that information, like go away and see as you do fit. And
what was your how did you see that information used? Was it like, do you think it was brushed away sometimes? Do you think it was actually taken on board? Do you think it depended on the athlete and depended on the actual coach you spoke to?
Yeah, to be honest, like all of the above. Like, I think when we first brought it in, it was sort of brushed to one side a little bit because it's this new thing, and I'm telling you as the coach, your athlete's tired based off this, and you've never really, like, we've never used this before, so why does this matter now? But I think because we were quite regular with it and consistent with it, and the process went on, and then you would also see certain things like people might present to us Monday afternoon, Tuesday morning as appearing quite fatigued. We'd have a word with the coach, and then towards the end of the week, they're just starting to report some kind of niggles or some kind of aches or pains to the physio. And it's not that is a bang on correlation and you were tired, so this happened, but it started to happen enough that some coaches more than others began to pay attention to it. And some would even like come and seek that information, like, how are the guys today on the jumps? Like, how are my girls? How are the guys? And you can then give that back to them. And again, I don't think decisions got made off it all the time, but it was just that little piece of extra information for them to make that decision on.
It's a package, isn't it? And I think that the wellness stuff, the RSI, how they look, how they're performing in training, what you know about the athlete, essentially what training phase they're in. Sometimes it is a case of, you are going to be fatigued, you are going to be sore, get on with it. That is an element of combat sport. It's an element of all sports, but I guess it's that line, isn't it? And that's the thing, we're always trying to teeter on that point of maximum progress, but without it being detrimental. It's hard,
Yeah, it's really difficult. And I think it depends on the system you're in as well. Like I've spent a few days sort of shadowing and in other environments where I physically heard the S&C kind of go to the coach and go, this person's readiness has dropped off today. Like, they're looking fatigued. They can only do 50% of this session. They need to miss that other 50% out. And that's fine if that's your system and your environment, but not everyone's environment's like that. Like, I think if I would have walked into that Taekwondo hall and grabbed one of our guys and gone, right, your session's done now, and dragged them out, like, I wouldn't have been out the door, but I'd have probably been quite close to it. Do you know what I mean? Like, that wasn't our remit as a support staff. So it's trying to find how you can make your impact and how you then phrase that conversation with the coaches. Because we had it as an example where our guys do a lot of training Monday to Friday. Like, the training volume was quite high, but one of the girls, she was the driving force behind it, but she wanted to come in on a Saturday morning and do additional sessions. Whether I think she just liked to always do something. And to be honest, she wasn't that fast twitch. She was definitely more of like an engine and like an endurance-based athlete. So probably you could argue if anyone was going to do it, she could handle it. But one of the big things that myself and her coach always spoke about was her ability to kind of be more reactive in her movement and be able to kind of travel a little bit further with sort of her leg up in a chamber. And over a period of months after she'd introduced that Saturday, I just routinely, like every Monday, tracked her drop jump. And the longitudinal trend of that drop jump became to trend down a little bit. So it meant that because of that, I was then able to, I just sort of sat down with the coach and the athlete and didn't kind of say like, look, I think you should stop this, but said like, ultimately your long-term goal, one of your long technical goals is to improve X. like physically, the characteristic I'm chasing is Y, and the long-term trend of that is now dropping off since we've started to introduce Saturdays. Like,
Yeah.
You then make that decision on what you want to do, but that's kind of what I'm seeing. And then, yeah, ultimately they rejig the week, pull that Saturday down a little bit, and then we started to see that kind of positive trend again. But it was utilized very differently, coach to coach, that sort of readiness monitoring. But the main thing we used was earlier on in a week, we did a drop jump.
Yeah.
Because our thinking was, if we look at not just the RSI, but how they achieve that, like the contact time and the jump height. So you're looking at the sort of movement strategy. We can get an element from fatigue of that, and a quality that we felt was quite important was that kind of reactive strength and stiffness around the ankle. So it meant we could monitor that as well. And then on a Friday,
sorry, mate, was that something? Had they done a lot of like drop jumps and stuff before? Was that like, one of the things with neuromuscular fatigue testing is making sure it's something that generally they're quite skilled at, so that there's not that big learning effect and all that. Was that something that they did quite a lot in their program pre?
Yeah, so there had been, before I started, they didn't have the force plate, but they did have an opto. So kind of routinely throughout the year, they would do drop jumps anyway. So it was something they were quite familiar with. But also, I don't, whether if it's just because Taekwondo athletes spend X amount of hours per day basically doing one low level repeated hop. Like, I got some of the youth athletes on it that probably really never done like a coach drop jump before. Like, gave them the cues, step on, and some of the RSIs are ridiculous without them even having done it before. So we could kind of hang our hat on that this is giving us a measure of what we want to see. And then on the Friday, we looked at something a little bit more neuromuscular based in a counter movement jump, and looked at their eccentric duration. So kind of looking at the jump height as the long-term measure of some kind of physical change, some neuromuscular improvement, but looking at their eccentric duration as in, right, well, are they changing their strategy? Is that eccentric duration now much longer than it normally is? Okay, something's going on there.
What that's cool. I love hearing about this, mate. It's I think jumping for S&C coaches, it's like S&C porn, isn't it? Just hearing numbers where you're like, okay, give me an idea of some of the RSIs and some of like I imagine they're really good at, drop jumps and reactivity. What about counter movement jumps? Give us some numbers to get us salivating a bit.
Yeah, so it's really mixed. I mean, we had one lad, Christian, who, what was the RSI? He hit a 4.6 RSI with like a 0.115 contact time. Like, it was, but the thing is,
didn't touch the floor.
Yeah, barely didn't touch. But the thing with Christian is like the most laid back kid ever. So like, he steps up onto the box. You go, right, Christian, give me a rep. And honestly, like, not a lot of care in his face. Steps off, does a 4.6, and you're like, I'm not even convinced this guy was trying, but that was mighty impressive. So yeah, there was a lot of guys kind of in around the fours, a lot of girls that were high threes as well. We even had one girl, Rebecca, break the 4 on the RSI for her drop jump. So like, mad numbers on the drop jump. Counter movement jump varied a little bit. We had a couple of, I think we had 3 or 4 of our male athletes, 2 from our Paralympic team, break the 50 centimeter counter movement jump. Again, that's off impulse. But yeah, so some big numbers, but it was interesting. What you tended to find was they were either kind of very reactive and springy, or very muscular in kind of how they achieved that output on some of the given tests. But yeah, so there were some good numbers. People do stuff and they go, "Was that good?" You'd be like, "Well, yeah, that was really good." Like,
that was okay. Yeah, like, that's funny.
When I was working back in rugby, you didn't even see that. So yeah, some good numbers.
With that, then, how does that information get used? I know you said it was kind of used a little bit more as like a daily readiness thing. Did that get used in terms of their programming, or was that just like a separate thing?
Yeah, so we used it as a readiness monitoring, and then it would get used in programming, kind of in collaboration with some of the other tests. So something that it was ultimately, the first goal was always sitting down with the coach and athlete and going, well, what technically are you trying to focus on? And then it would be kind of sat down, having the conversation with them as to, is it that the coach felt they couldn't get their hip into a certain position because they were kind of restricted a little bit, then would factor that into the program. But ultimately, the big rocks for us were, if you are expected as an athlete to do this amount of training within the week, all these little things that we're trying to help improve technically, or all these little things we're trying to improve physically that will carry over to your technical game, are good and willing, like they are included, but actually we just need to make you able to tolerate a lot of training. You know, we need to make you a little bit more robust to spikes and changes in training load. That's where the big win's going to come from, because I think it was on Ben Rosenblatt did a podcast with Pacey Performance. I'm sure it was Pacey Performance a little while back, and he mentioned about how I'm sure it was hockey. He said he'd broken his approach down into like training to train, training to compete, and then train to perform. Sure, that was the three. And that really resonated with me at the time, because I'd sit in meetings with coaches and would have conversations about these real technical things that needed focusing on, but like this athlete couldn't string 3 days of training together. So it's like we're all talking about these real technical things they need to focus on, which is great, but they're not training. So how can we make them better to train? So the idea was kind of that. We looked at the from the counter movement jump, that was just really a long-term measure of neuromuscular output. Like, are they becoming a bit more fine-tuned in the neuromuscular system? Would then also use that in a collaboration with like a mid-thigh pull to get a dynamic strength index. Like, where does this athlete sit on the dynamic strength index? And then for like, probably where is it going to be more beneficial to base some of their training around? And again, that didn't dictate the program, it just helped guided it. But did this person, if the coach was talking about them being more explosive off the mark, like if they're sat very, very high up on that dynamic strength index, then I'm probably going to give them a bit more strength training to try and solve that problem.
Hi guys, I'm just going to take a brief break in today's podcast to talk to you about the Adapt online strength and conditioning coaching service. At Adapt, we put the athlete first and make sure that the whole program is set up around them, their goals, their sport, and their lifestyle to achieve the best possible performances. Our aim is to deliver an elite level coaching experience that typically isn't always commercially available if not part of a professional club or performance pathway system. We communicate with our athletes on a weekly and sometimes daily basis, making changes in technique and making alterations to the program based on how you're performing on any given day. We also bring in experts from psychologists, nutritionists, and physiotherapists for online educational workshops to make sure we are giving you all the tools necessary to excel in your sport. So if you're looking to take your physicality to the next level and want to invest in yourself, head over to the website at adaptstrength.co.uk for more information, including some success stories of our current athletes, or drop me a message to set up a chat to discuss the options. Hope you're enjoying today's podcast, so let's get back to it. Give us a little bit more on the dynamic strength index, just for some of the people that may not know exactly what it is. Just kind of explain to us what it is and how you achieve that, if that's all right, mate.
Yeah, sure. So the dynamic strength index, the idea with it is you take the peak force in a mid-thigh pull, so kind of your very static, just how much force can you produce, and then you take the concentric peak force of a counter movement jump. So then, what's your ability to express that force dynamically? You basically divide the two together, and you sort of get a figure that is normally between 0 and 1. Sometimes I saw a few outliers that were actually like a 1.1. But then it kind of suggests that if they sit towards the higher end of that 1, so if let's say they were a 0.95, that means that they're able to express 95% of their overall force, like in a dynamic task such as a counter movement jump. So they're very good at kind of recruiting that neuromuscular system and recruiting it quickly. Whereas if they sat like a 0.4, they can only recruit 40% of their overall force in a task like a counter movement jump. So that ability of the neuromuscular system and kind of to utilize like intramuscular coordination to generate force quickly isn't quite there. And then it allows you to base your training off that. So I think the rough guides out there is that if you sit below a 0.6, that means you're kind of very biased towards the strength side, and you probably need a little bit more of the higher velocity ballistic type training. If you sit above a 0.8, you're kind of very velocity dominant. You probably need more strength training just to try and build your overall force output. And if you sit between 0.6 and 0.8, you're kind of middle of the road. So a bit of both. You probably don't need to favorite either one. And I always found that to be just quite a useful metric, just to, like I say, help guide the programming a little bit. Because ultimately, I don't think I know a fighter that doesn't want to be more powerful, more explosive, but how do we actually go about improving that?
Yeah.
Like if you're already, and with a lot of the Taekwondo guys, what I tend to see is they were already very sort of velocity dominant. They already sat towards the higher end of that spectrum. And I think that's because for most, before they join the full-time program, a lot of their quote unquote S&C is hurdle jumps and hops and bounds and stuff that they do within their club that probably sits towards that higher velocity like spectrum.
Absolutely. And so the sport itself.
Yeah, the sport itself is massively high velocity. So actually for them to start to push the boundary a little bit and make improvements, you could argue, well, you need more of that foundational strength work. So I use that to guide it a little bit, but then also look at, going back to the metrics, we just looked at, relative peak force from a mid-thigh pull. Just because the guy's weight would fluctuate at times throughout the year, depending on when we could test them. So at least with relative peak force, we could keep it consistent throughout the year. We looked at isometric peak plantar flexion. So like basically an isometric calf raise. Again, just how much force can you produce through that foot and ankle joint? And then what else do we use? Yeah, drop jump, counter movement jump on the force plate anyway, mid-thigh pull, and then a peak plantar flexion. And to be honest, the main way that those numbers got used is because I think if you're in a sport where you have to kick people for a living, you're going to pick up injuries. You're going to pick up a lot of foot, a lot of calf, a lot of hamstring. It's just going to happen. Whether if it's contact related, that's kind of the main driver. But so you'd have a lot of people who tended to sit on this kind of fence of they're not in rehab, but they're managing something.
Yeah.
So we could use a lot of these metrics to help guide as well. Like, okay, when they're coming in the gym today, I'm going to get them to do a mid-thigh pull. Where did they sit prior to when they did it when they were healthy, when they had nothing going on? Get them to do a camp. So that's kind of how we use them a lot. We'd have scheduled testing times when it fitted within the training block throughout a year, where we were looking at, okay, well, what's the long-term change in these physical characteristics that we feel helps underpin their ability to tolerate training? But then if someone was coming out of rehab or was managing something, similar to, like I said, with the readiness stuff, we could also then use a mid-thigh pull to have a conversation with a coach to suggest that, well, actually, they're down 40% on that side at the minute. So I wouldn't ramp their training up a little bit from where they're at the minute. Because this suggests they probably couldn't tolerate it.
I think that that topic around tolerating training based off what they're like as an athlete is super interesting. I was listening to Joel Smith on Just Fly Performance, and he speaks around, basically what you said there on the dynamic strength index. You've got these athletes that are, more muscular driven, very strength dominant athletes. And then you've got the twitchier guys, the little bit more greyhound looking, just tendons. And, how you want to give them a certain amount of what they've got, but ultimately try and develop the other things. And he kind of crosses over a lot. He is quite philosophical. Bloody hell, I'm going to butcher
philosophical. I've got you.
Cheers, mate. He's got me sorted. Bloody hell. And he speaks around, sometimes if you give like the greyhound guy, the tendon guy, too much strength, he starts to break down and all those types of things. Just digging into, I guess, your dynamic strength index example of how it can guide your programming. Is that more for kind of off season or out of fight camp style of programming? And then once you enter fight camp, it's more around, does it change slightly, or is that still the guiding principle behind it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So it's the challenge at Taekwondo is that the competition year pretty much runs from January to December.
Okay.
Like I think before I started, or a couple of years before I started anyway, it used to be you kind of had this season where maybe the competition started in April, drifted out around October, September. But then they brought in the Grand Prix series, which was kind of for like your heavy hitters. So they then spread the other competitions around. So really in Taekwondo, there's no kind of off season as such. And it's a year round competition. It's a year round calendar. And the challenge with that then becomes that the way that athletes qualify for the Olympics is a points-based system. So if you attend a G1 out in the Netherlands, just an open, and you win, you get 10 points. If you win like a Europeans, you get 40 points. If you win a Worlds, it's 100 points. So everyone's kind of chasing these points. And the challenge with that then becomes, if someone doesn't have a good start to the year, they might then start to bank a lot of extra competitions at the end of the year to try and chase those points. So that kind of then becomes one of the challenges where you don't have an off season where you think, right, well, this guy needs some strength work. I'm going to use this window to kind of get it into him. You don't really have that. So the way that I tended to try and run it was just in conversations with the coaches, like when they were, after they'd sat down and mapped out the year, and they would put in, okay, well, we're going to treat this as a technical phase, which I suppose for us S&Cs is like a general phase. We're then going to have these few weeks, which we are going to call an application phase, which for us is probably like a transitional phase, and then your comp phase. They would map those out. And then I would kind of sit down with them and go, okay, are there any periods of the year where it's going to be less detrimental to you if they are a little bit fatigued? And they might say, this little block here and this little block here. So that's when I might try and treat that as their off camp. But that period might be 2 weeks. That period might be 3 weeks. So the way that I tended to try and think about using the information from like the dynamic strength index and their physical testing was having that as like the underlying principle that I was focusing on with them year round. Mm-hmm. But it was just the volumes in that I would try and kind of expose them to it. So if I felt someone needed a bit more just foundational strength, they just needed to be able to express a bit more force, that might be their focus for me for a year. But actually I'll give them a big dose of it in these 2 or 3 weeks, and then just try and really like minimal dose. If it doesn't improve, it doesn't improve, but hopefully we're not getting any worse. Yeah. And then right now there's the next window, let's go again. So that's kind of how I would try and manage that. But it's a really challenging sport to try and work in when you sit down and look at the year and go, there's no off season. Like they might get a week off in the summer and 2 weeks off at Christmas, but outside of that, it's on. And when they're in training, like they're in. There's 2 sessions a day, 5 days a week. That's sort of how it looks.
Yeah, I suppose certain sports do have those limitations, don't they? And it's not, obviously from an S&C standpoint, it's not ideal, but we're there as support staff, aren't we? We're there to support what they're actually doing training. That's the priority. We're not trying to make them the world's best athlete per se. They don't win medals in the gym or in the squat rack. So it makes a lot of sense. With just going into the plyometric side. So one of the things you said earlier was around their day-to-days. They basically spend 2 hours just low-level hopping. Okay, so probably not strictly plyometric if we look at the contact times. I'm not sure, but it's very, it is jumping, it is ballistic. So how do you go about improving that in a sport that does it day in, day out constantly? What's your kind of process for unpicking that?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, particularly when it comes to looking at, I suppose, let's call it the more reactive plyos we might do. So hops, bound, drop jumps. I initially, there was kind of, I'm trying to think when it was. It might have been at the start of 2020, or it might have been halfway through 2019. There was a bit of a light bulb moment where I can't remember. I think I programmed one of my athletes like 3 sets of 15 calf raises. And they went through their calf raises. My idea was, it's a little bit of strength endurance, a little bit of work capacity, just trying to keep the muscle tendon unit healthy and expose it to load through a full range. And then I'm sat in training the next morning, I'm watching them and going, if they're doing probably 14 to 15 hours of Taekwondo a week, which most of the session, when they're not at a high intensity in terms of their kicking, they're always moving. They're always on their feet. Like if they're doing 15 hours of this low level hopping and moving per week, what's 3:15's calf raises actually doing? Like, am I just feeding into the problem? Am I just exposing them to stuff that they don't really need? And I kind of toyed with that for a little while and didn't do anything about it, and had a chat with my colleague Reese, who was the lead there, and to and froed a little bit. And then we started a bit more of a deep dive into it. And ultimately I found myself at this point where the approach I took was like a polarized approach, almost to developing, particularly when we're talking about like plyos, to try and develop like Achilles tendon stiffness, or the more reactive side of things. In that, I think the guy Fion, who was running the injury rehabilitation unit at the time, sent me and Reese a few papers that he had on hopping. And I think it was in low level kind of preferred height hopping. So if I was to just get you, on one leg, just hop at your own preferred height that feels right for you, there's about 3 times body weight going through that ankle joint. And then if you go max effort height, so you're really hopping for height now, it becomes about 5 times. So these guys are exposed to huge, and if you imagine how many times they're doing that throughout a day, throughout a week, like they're actually getting a lot of load through that foot and that ankle and that calf complex. So the approach that I went down the end was like, right, well, I don't think just more of that's going to help unless it's a rehab type case. So yeah, I took a polarized approach in terms of that. I did a lot of kind of longer duration isometric holds. So whether if it was just like a low level calf raise hold, hands on the wall, up on your toes, kind of almost into a peak plantar flexion, but not quite, and like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds, almost with the idea of this is your tendon health loading. Like actually, I'm just looking to try and get a little bit of creep going through that tendon, just to try and keep it healthy and offset a lot of this loading it's doing. And then on the opposite side of the spectrum from that, I'm either going to do some really high intense drop jumps, because a lot of the hopping they do on the mat is kind of lower level. It isn't with a real high intent. Just because there's so many technical elements that come into the skill they're trying to do, I don't think they can express it to a true max intent. So either some really high end like drop jumps or ankling hops with max intent, or look more at like Alex Natera's almost like run isometrics, but just some real max effort, overcoming isos in like a squat rack. Just 1 second, I think he calls them, is it explodes? Holds and explodes, but like some explode reps, just to try and load that tendon with more than they get on the mat. And then outside of that, hope that the sport kind of trains the rest.
Yep.
That was the approach that I ended up taking with regards to around plyometrics around the foot and ankle anyway. Outside of that, you might throw in the odd counter movement jump, box jump, if you have an athlete who you think is just struggling to express themselves or kind of really rapidly recruit that neuromuscular system. Like you might put some of that in, but yeah, generally it tended to be a bit of a polarized system. It was either real low level holds or top end really intensive hopping or overcoming isometrics, with the idea that I probably don't need to give them much extra plyometric loading when that is their sport.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think the sport is going to take care of a certain amount of physicality, and it is that thing of the sport itself doesn't always develop that physical output they need to be successful, and I think Kierwan Flat speaks about that as well. That is why we have jobs as S&C coaches. If a KPI for that athlete is to move really, really quickly, the sport itself or the training for the sport is usually done at such a lower intensity that it never actually touches that high end. And that's exactly what you're speaking about there. You're giving the athlete what they don't already get, which is, it aligns very much with my philosophy as well. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah.
Go on.
Oh no, so I was going to say, yeah, it's basically exactly what Kia said there. I think also when you come back to our big philosophy that we had as S&Cs there, which was let's keep these guys on the mat. It was around, okay, well, how can we improve these qualities we need to without starting to give them load that they're already getting? And I think in some sports, if there's less of a technical aspect to it, like, I don't know, cycling is very technical, but I always use cycling as an example. Like, I think on a bike, these guys can they're so technically proficient that they can exert a real high output on the pedals and on the bike. But I think the more chaos you add to an environment or to a skill, the less of a real high physical output you can start to express. And that's my thing of like, the sport's only going to train so much. And in the gym, I'm just going to really try and expose these guys to more than the sport's going to give them, with the hope that then their technical sessions start to fill into that gap I've created, if that makes sense. And just constantly play that game. The bigger, the more I can the bigger kind of central nervous system output I can give them in the gym through some of the exercises I have, hopefully they'll then learn to utilize that through their sport.
Yeah, I love it. It's good stuff, mate. It's good. So tell us a little bit more about what you've got going on, mate. So outside of Taekwondo, and what's next for you? What's next for you in the business, and triathlon? What you got coming up?
Yeah, so at the minute in triathlon's kind of in the middle of their race season now. So I joined, when did I start? I started February actually, just when it literally first day back from maternity leave, boom, I was in. Or paternity leave, sorry. I was in. And then they were so close to the race season that I haven't really done much with them. Like they already had some current S&C plans they were doing. I basically kept them running whilst I got to know them. So they're in the race season now. I'm just trying to keep them ticking over really whilst I kind of figure out when we get to the end of the race season, where do I want to try and take this program? Like, how do I not put my stamp on it, but what do I think we could do better as a strength and conditioning team in this program? So that's triathlon. They're sort of all over the place at the minute. Sometimes I might have one in the gym. Sometimes I might have 8. Really varies. And then in terms of my private stuff, it's mixed. We've got had a few fighters fight this weekend just gone. Really busy July. So I've got one of my boxers is fighting at the end of July. And I think 3 or 4 of my MMA guys are fighting at the end of July.
Nice.
Yeah, that's getting quite busy. To be honest, the private side of things took off really well, like a lot quicker than I expected. I don't think many people quit their job just before a baby's due. Like hand their notice in 6 weeks before the partner's about to give birth and go, oh, I'm leaving. I'm going to go self-employed where there's no guaranteed salary. So I was a bit worried about how many people I could get through the door to start covering like bills and stuff straight away. But I mean, we spoke a few weeks ago, didn't we? And I've sort of got to the point now where it's a really good position to be in, that I actually don't need to take on any more one-to-ones. Like I'm kind of at the point where I think if I took on more, it would be detrimental to my coaching and probably my own just well-being or mental well-being because of how many sessions I was doing in the gym. So the one-to-one side of things, I've got a good roster of fighters now that I'm really happy with across a variety of sports. So they're all progressing really well. I'm trying to work with the coaches at Top Team to kind of try to make it a more almost like a full-time sport environment. That was the reason that I chose to go to that gym, really. One of the driving factors behind me leaving Taekwondo. I spoke to Carl, who sort of owns it, and it wasn't just, he didn't have this vision of an S&C coach setting up in the gym just so he could have an S&C coach in the gym. It was like he wanted someone who could come in and not necessarily work with everyone, because some guys already have S&C coaches, some guys might already do their own stuff, but have someone who could run workshops and the guys could just bounce ideas off and could help the coaches structure their week in the right way. So yeah, working with them to constantly try and progress what we're doing at Top Team in terms of the support we give to the guys, which is cool. And then the main thing for me now is I'm trying to grow there's 2 things really, trying to grow the online side of my business a little bit. I've hit the point where, like I said, I don't want to do any more one-to-ones, but there's still scope to do some online work. So trying to bring a few more online clients in. And then I've just started a project called Fight Ready with a guy called Ben Harper, who's the physiotherapist that I used to work with at Taekwondo, where we've essentially got this vision where we want to try and take the support that you would get being an elite athlete on a full-time program, such as boxing, Taekwondo, if you were in football, if you're in rugby, like try and take that support you would get and be able to offer it out to boxers, MMA fighters, anyone who wants that but just can't access it for whatever reason. Because I'm sure you found it as well, and we spoke a little bit about this before we started recording as well, that being in the private sector, you get guys come to you who go like, oh, I've been and seen this physio over the weekend, and they've got me doing X, or all right, I'm off to see this nutritionist and he's told me Y. And I don't know, being practitioners, we all have our own philosophy, and you'll have your big things that you believe in. And if someone comes to tells an athlete that you work with to do stuff that is very opposite to you, like sometimes, whether rightly or wrongly, it's quite hard to then work with that or try to support that athlete as best as possible. So Ben's got very similar philosophies to me, and we had there was an MMA fighter who came back from Thailand, or he tore his MCL in Thailand like last session before his most recent fight. I think he was fighting in 4 days, and the guy shot, the video is quite nasty actually. The guy shot on him, like tore his MCL, got through the fight, won it just, And then he reached out to me about doing some S&C work, like starting in the gym with me. And I basically like, yeah, mate, I'm all up for helping you out. Like, I'd love to get you on board. But if you don't think something's right in your knee, and I don't think at this point he'd fully had it diagnosed what it was. But I was like, I don't want to be guessing. Like, I want to know what we've got 7 weeks for your next fight. Like, I want to know exactly what this is. So can you go see Ben? Ben will then feed back to me what it is. He'll give me some stuff to put in your program, and we'll just run it like that for a little bit. So he went to see Ben. Ben gave him some exercises, gave him a bit of treatment. He'd then come and see me. And from obviously me knowing Ben really well, I'd already spoke to Ben before he came in, had put a few of these rehab bits in his S&C program. Once he'd finished with me, I then spoke to Ben. So the next time we went to see Ben, he was already up to date on kind of how he'd been in his last session. And the feedback we got from this guy was great. It was like, I've never had this, like outside of when I think he was on The Ultimate Fighter like a while back, but he was like, I've never had this since I've always gone to see this guy here and this guy here, and they've never collaborated. And it was after that, me and Ben went for a drink, and we were just like, I think there's something in this. Like, absolutely. It's not going to be for everyone. Like, sadly, if you're a low level amateur, like it's probably not going to be the package for you. But the whole idea is we've got hopefully this premium product that if we get a guy who comes in off the back of a fight a bit beaten up and says, right, I'm going again in 4 months, we've got kind of Ben's network as a physio that we can liaise these guys out to, like reach out to a doc, we can reach out to a nutritionist, we can reach out to a PA, and just try and almost give these people like the full, like we called it integrated sports science and medicine, but like the full approach to sports science, when without them having to go and try and source it and get people to work together who may not have worked together before. That's quite exciting as well.
Man, it's cool. I think it needs it. You know, it's definitely a sport that is progressing with some of the stuff the UFCPI are doing, and it is moving in the right direction. But there's still areas and cities that need a little bit more of that. You know, I don't know if you found this, but I've definitely been there as well. Earlier on, when I was trying to figure out the online side and what I wanted to do as like a private coach, is pitching it at the right level. You know, pitching your service to the people correctly. You know, so there's been periods of time where I've like tried to throw in every bit of knowledge and make it elite level. You know, make it a Ferrari. But they don't want a Ferrari because a Ferraris cost quite a bit, you know, in which case it doesn't work. So maybe you're happy just giving them, looking outside at my shit Ford Fiesta, giving them one of them, you know, and that's enough to push them forward. And they're happy with that cost. They're happy with the level of service. And that's something I've been toying with a little bit. And it sounds to me, you know, what you've got there is really developing a Ferrari for the people that want it and really want to push forward to the next level, which is sick, you know, and I think people will benefit from that hugely.
Yeah, that's the hope. And I mean, like you say, it's one of the things that it's probably not going to be open to or like available to most people. Like a lot of people will look at it and go, oh, that's not for me. Like there's just maybe either there's too much there, or realistically, like actually the price is probably a bit too high. But for those that the kind of hope is for those that do want it and it's within their grasp, they might buy into it, they might do it. And a lot of these younger guys coming through will look up to them and at the very least, like, see how this looks, and then maybe go, okay, well, this is the S&C I work with, this is the physio that I work with. Like, actually, can you guys chat? Yeah. Because that's something that I try and encourage even with my guys a lot. Like if they are seeing a physio or someone outside, one, I hope it's someone whose beliefs fit with mine, because if not, you know, it's always a challenging conversation. But just go like, right, if you want me to have a chat with them, let's have a chat with them, because everyone needs to be singing off the same hymn sheet for that to work.
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. I think that's probably a really good point to end on. You know, for athletes that are listening, for coaches that are listening, create some synergy within your program. You know, and sometimes most of the time, it's going to have to be the athlete in the private sector that instigates that brings everyone together. You know, and it's something that you're going to get off after. Messing up words again. You're going to have to get off your ass and do that. It's going to take a little bit of, you know, figuring out. But I think everyone needs to be singing off the same hymn sheet. Cool. So I'm just going to wrap this up, mate. I'm conscious of time. It's your fun Wednesday where you get to have a nap, not have a nap, whatever you've got. Yeah, do all your admin. But I just want to take the time just to thank you, mate. And I think the growth of what I've been seeing in terms of your social media stuff, but also what you're saying there around some of these projects you got going on. It's awesome. It's awesome for people that are involved in S&C, but definitely in the combat space. I think keep doing what you're doing. It's great to see.
Yeah, thank you, man. It's always good to pick up. So yeah, good to chat.
Nice one, mate. So at the end of this, I'll put all your details. So I'll put your website, I'll put your Instagram and everything just in the show notes so people can drop in there. But yeah, appreciate your time, James. Thank you very much.
No worries, mate. I'll speak to you soon. Take it easy.
Thanks for listening to the Adapt Performance podcast. Let me know what you thought about the episode by leaving a review or sending me a direct message. I'm all for receiving the honest feedback to make sure the episodes grow and get better and better. Like, share, subscribing and following all goes a long way to making sure the podcast reaches the right people. Thanks a lot. Catch you next time.